guys? Michael Anthony here, another video. Today we have Liquid Modern, Jason from Night Razor, Mr. D, Dr. Sector of Warpsektor, Chris from Electronic Ghost Machine, and Vaughn from VHxRR. Today's video is going to be about mixing and mastering. What's good? Is it necessary? First question I have, what does mixing and mastering consist of? Why is it important? And what does it do for a song?
I guess I'll jump in.
Take it away, Vaughn.
All right, mixing. Well, okay, you've produced a song. What do you do with it, right? Like, you have all your things recorded in, but nothing's leveled right. Mixing is essentially properly using dynamic control and equalization to properly get the individual parts of the song leveled so that the mix sounds balanced and even. Once you have a mix that sounds good, it is typically handed off to a mastering engineer, which sometimes is the same person as the mixing engineer, sometimes it's a different person completely. But the mastering engineer then takes the mix and then takes it up to whatever the program level should be that you want to target.
I was going to say, would this be a good time to bring up the idea of gain staging and talk a little bit about what the importance of that in the mixing process and, you know, giving the headroom to the mastering engineer?
Sure. Well, gain staging, I work in analog, but it's just as important in the box, even with like floating point headroom and whatnot. You know, you still don't want to be like crushing your mix bus, but you know, before it gets to the plugins, because then you're crushing your plugin input. You know what I mean? And they're only built to take so much. And like, one of the biggest differences of analog and digital is the headroom, because in digital you have a hard ceiling at 0. And in analog, you can push things beyond 0, and that's where like saturation begins. And you're essentially naturally gluing or like compressing things together by pushing things louder than they should go. You know what I mean? And you can get that kind of natural saturation in analog because you're pushing it through components, like analog components, as where in the computer, you're pushing it through a calculator. So it processes differently. And that's why like analog can sound a little more natural sometimes, because it's not as precise. And so you can have certain parts of like a drum beat that might be very precise in digital and looped, where it sounds like, you know, it's cutting through it exactly the same frequency every time. As where when you push that through to analog, every now and then those things might get rounded off in peaks and valleys. And it's just how our ears pick things up. You know, we can pick up patterns really well. And so sometimes you can pick up when things like, that's why swing exists in a drum machine, right? Because our ears can hear when it's too precise. And sometimes that can happen in digital, and where analog kind of smooths some of those things out a bit more naturally for you. Not that one's better than the other. Like, you know, Andrew Sheps, who's, I would argue, one of the best mixing engineers in the world, mixes in the box and with headphones.
Yeah, I think you can get a lot of the same effects, like you said, if you stay below 0, because you can make any wave shape in digital that you can make in analog. And I think the analog thing that you were talking about, where you push it too far, was more like saturating, like a tube preamp or something, where a transistor will chop off a wave, a tube will round a wave if you push it too far, and that kind of gives you a smoother, more natural feeling sound than a digital chop off that it really grates on people unless you're using it for like a guitar distortion or something. So yeah,
soft clipping is a thing.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah,
like
that's
some of
what that
the
does.
analog simulator plugins, like the J37 tape saturation plugin, because I don't have any like external analog preamps or anything like that that I run through.
Yeah, before I had all my outboard gear, I used tape plugins and, bus compressors. Like I like the old school SSL bus compressor. I still like that on a mix, especially if you have a wet dry knob on it, because you can dial between the two. So you don't have to, cut all those transient peaks off by pushing it through the compressor. And, you can have some of that dry signal come through, so you keep that cut,
Yeah.
Yeah, the Waves G channel is one of my favorite compressor emulators, but I'm curious though, you've alluded to this a couple of times, and I think it's a very important point to bring up. The analog gear, what is your what's your stack look like on your rack?
Sure.
Give us like a signal chain,
Sure. My interface, like I have a Antelope Orion 32 plus, so that gives me 32 channels in and out over Thunderbolt. Well, it gives me 64 channels in and out, but it gives me 32 analog connections of in and out through the Tascam cables that you run 8 channels through. It looks like an old serial port. It uses those, and from there, I run the 32 channels out directly into the solid state logic Sigma. And the Sigma is essentially like the same mix bus from their big consoles, like the Duality and the AWS, but it's chopped down into a 2-unit rack mount. And it has 16 stereo buses or channels, 16 stereo channels. And then it has 2 stereo buses, an A and a B bus. So what I do is I run the 32 channels out of the Orion into the Sigma, and then from the Sigma, I can decide what gets sent to the A bus and the B bus, and typically I send everything to both because I have 2 different compressors on each. I have a Chameleon Labs 7721 stereo VCA bus compressor on the A bus, and I keep it on the A bus because it has a wet dry knob. And I like being able to keep some of that dry signal poking through without compressing everything. And then on the B bus, I have a warm VCA compressor, and that doesn't have a wet dry knob. So everything going through that is coming out fully compressed at whatever ratio I'm using. And then in the Sigma, the B bus gets folded back into the A bus so that the output of the A bus then gets captured back in from analog to digital. And for that, I use a Dangerous Convert 80 Plus. And I love the shit out of that thing because it has all kinds of bells and whistles. And one of them is a thing called Clip Guard, which is a button you can push, and it turns off like the overage meters, even though you're still clipping the converter on the way in. And so the way I use this, and the way that they recommend this piece be used, is I don't use an analog limiter. I use the converter as the limiter. So I use the compression that goes back into the Sigma, and then the Sigma pushes into the Dangerous however hot I need it to. And the thing I love about the Sigma is it has 24 decibels above zero of headroom. And so I have it configured for 18 decibels above zero because that's what the Dangerous runs at. And I can set the metering on the Orion the same way. So essentially I have 18 decibels of usable headroom above zero.
So I got a question for you to clarify. So you're coming out of your DAW with whatever 32 tracks of stuff. You're compressing it, you're folding back in, and then you're going back in and re-recording it, re-digitizing it as a stereo pair, or?
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
okay.
Yeah, and that's now the other thing I really love about the Sigma is it's set up to be like a real SSL board without all the channel and knobs. So I can print the stems out of the Sigma. So I have those 16 channels coming out, and I also have an A bus and B bus out. So I can record the 16 channels or the 16 stereo coming out plus an A bus plus a B bus all at once, which is super.
So you said if you've got 24 above zero, does that mean when somebody sends a mix to you for mastering, they can master it to zero. I mean, they can mix it to 0 dB without the, I'm used to giving somebody at least 6 and usually 12 decibels
Well,
of headroom.
like, just
at the top of
don't
my
clip
mix.
digital. Just don't clip
Mhm.
digital. As long as you're not clipping digital at all, I can get it out cleanly and push it up however loud I need it. Now, I'm not saying that I go 18 decibels above 0. That tends to sound like garbage because you've pushed things like, you're purely in the red at that point. But you have that headroom for dynamics. So you can keep a mix sounding more dynamic even though it's still loud because you have, like, I don't know, voltage. Physics, man. Like,
Even though you've compressed the hell out of it, you still have a little punch room above.
yeah. Like,
Yeah.
the transient response is so quick, and
You're gonna hear
SSL
those
makes
hits.
great kit. Like, I absolutely love it. And going back into the dangerous, like, so this whole analog thing is all kind of, this chain is less than a year old. Essentially, like, December of last year, not the December we just had, but a year, like 15 months ago, I got the dangerous. And then 2 months after that, I got the chameleon. And a month after that, I got the warm. And then it took me like 8 or 9 months to really, really, really learn like what the sweet spot was for each of them. And then how to hit them so that they worked as a pair. And I have it to the point now where I can pretty much put stuff through and have things pre-leveled so that it's always hitting where I need it to hit out the box. And then I can make those minor adjustments. But I use a template when I start a Cubase session. And the way I set my session up is 16 stereo buses, or 16 stereo groups. And that goes right to the 16 stereo outputs that go into this. So I might have whatever 40, 50 channels in a song, but they're all getting bounced down to those 16 groups. Mm-hmm. And I keep them in an order so that I know what I'm reaching for. So like channels 1 through 16, 1 is kick, 2 is snare, 3 is cymbals, 4 is toms, 5 is miscellaneous percussion, 6 is the drum bus, 7 is the bass 2, 8 is the main bass. Now I'm in the second bank, so I go into synths, horns or chimes, 11 will be guitars, and then 12 and 13 I keep for like strings or organs. And then the way I do vocal effects is still like the old school way of using sends. Like I don't use inserts on vocals. I use effects channels and I send things to those effects channels. So every session every template session that I start has 5 effects channels built in, 4 different reverbs and a delay. And each of those reverbs does something tiny. One is like a really tight vocal one. One is a super long one, a Valhalla shimmer. And then I have 2 TC electronic ones with like physical controllers that I keep for like nice longer vocal effects and delays, and then just like a stereo delay. But all of those effects then get routed to bus 4 or group 14, and then 15 and 16 are for vocals, but they're dry. So those vocals are coming through dry, and then I mix in the wetness level with the effects fader.
So I got a question for you. Do you run anything on the way in? Do you run through any analog stuff like microphone preamps or anything like that?
I don't really record. Like I don't record vocals, and I use mostly VSTs. So it's very rare
when you
that
get vocals, somebody just sends them to you.
Mm-hmm.
Already recorded. I got you. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Like, yeah, I've never met Rob. He's in Seattle, so he always sends me vocals, and I grab them, plug them into the session, and do what I do to them.
Cool, interesting. Yeah.
I think you're kind of hitting on something here that's interesting. Is that the mixing and the mastering process is pretty much as much of an art form as the writing of the music itself. There's so much complexity, and and also so much of yourself that you have to kind of put into it as you're going through it.
Well, I always say, like, writing music and engineering are two very different skill sets and parts of the brain. And like, you can be very musically creative, but not have a clue when it comes to the technical part of engineering. And that's fine. That's fine because there's someone else who does know how to do that. You know what I'm saying? And the same goes for engineering. There's plenty of engineers who suck at being musicians. I might be one of them. But the point is, I at least know what I'm doing from a technical standpoint. So all I'm saying is recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. You don't have to be great at everything. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean,
I am
traditionally,
not
those
a
were
good
different
plumber
folks.
or electrician. So I call a plumber or an electrician when I need one. It's the same for music. You don't have to do it all. You can be really good at writing music and not great at mixing it. And that's fine, you know? Or you can be that person who is capable of doing it from A to Z and does it flawlessly. Those people exist too, you know? But I think self-awareness is important and like understanding, like if you can't get it to where you want it to be, ask for help. There's nothing wrong with it, you know?
I mean, 20 years ago, it was always split up. You know, you had like your engineer, you had your producer, you had the studio, then you had the band or the songwriter, the guy that was good at playing drums, you know, that sort of thing. Now it's like, because of the technology, people are able to do every step of the way themselves, but man, it's a lot.
Well, even for me, like the level at which I'm able to like output music for people, I could not have done at home 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like the gear did simply not exist at that point.
Right.
You know?
Right. Definitely.
We
So-
would have been ADAT at the time, right? 20 years ago.
I worked in a studio with ADATs, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. DATs and
Or
ADATs,
VHS tapes for 32 tracks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we had we do super VHS tapes for those. Like we had like the 8-DAT set or the Alesis ADATs with like the 8 tracks on them.
Yeah, I remember
Mhm.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
You remember when they first
Precursor to
came
Pro
out? It
Tools.
was like, this is incredible that you could
Yeah.
do that. You
Yeah.
could bounce and not you know, the signal to noise ratio, everything was great. It was like unbelievable what you could do. Because prior to that, it was like, at least for me, it was like a cassette player 4-track, you know.
Yeah, I still have one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and every
Or
time you
could go
bounced,
to
you
a-
lost quality.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or you could go to a studio with a 16 or 32 track and, you know, pay more than somebody probably any of our ages at the time could afford for, you know,
Definitely,
studio
yeah.
time. Yeah.
So I think it's good and bad, you know, because like the democratization of the technology has made it easier for people to do, but the downside is it's made it easier for people to do, and therefore a lot of people think that they can do it all, and you can't. Or maybe you can. I'm not the one to tell you you can't. You know, I'm not gonna be that guy.
Well, the other thing too is listening to you break down how you do that. There are a lot of people out there that are going to listen to that, glaze over, and think there is no possible way I can do that. I don't understand anything that he's talking about. I mean, there is a level below what you're talking about where you can mix and work
Oh, absolutely.
right from the computer, everything in the box. Maybe you don't record anything at all. Maybe you just need like a little MIDI keyboard. So I mean, there's levels and levels, but still, you know, there's a lot.
Yeah, I got
Yeah.
out of the box in 2013, but prior to that, everything I had mixed, you know, even at larger studios was on Pro Tools, and it tended to be in the box, you know. People didn't want to pay for the giant board.
Yeah.
Like you could rent a suite and get a song mixed. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
Yeah, we've taken kind of a an interesting approach with it, where I've been in the learning mode for the past couple of years from soup to nuts, right? Learning how to write music, learning how to beginning how to mix and master, that type of thing, and I've kind of incorporated a lot of that into the actual songwriting process. So as I'm choosing voices, I'm adding in EQ for different things. So I'm doing a lot of mixing, as we build the song from the ground up. So it's probably not the normal way of doing it, but it's eliciting some interesting results.
Well, I mean, if you know how you want that thing to sound and it's not sounding that way, turn that knob till it sounds how you want it to sound.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if someone
Well, I
else
mean,
says, hey, that doesn't sound right, then, you know, back off. But go for what you want. Like if you want to get it there and that patch didn't do it for you or whatever the case.
I think
Turn
what
the
he's
knob.
trying to say is now that all this stuff is becoming into one box, the processes are starting to overlap a little bit.
Mhm.
So maybe
Sure.
you start to think about headroom way ahead of time, and you start to compress individual tracks sometimes to create an effect, or you have less effects on the master because you do more effects on the individual tracks and they come out exactly the way that you want through the headphones. And so like different procedures are starting to get like swapped around of how they happen. I think just naturally from having more tools, I think people are starting to use them in strange ways that they get the sound they want out of it. So
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Do it.
yeah.
Turn those knobs. Like go after it. Because there isn't a right way or a wrong way. There's plenty of wrong ways, but there's not like a right way to do it where one person can claim like the only way that you can EQ a snare drum is if you do it this way. Like, no, bullshit.
Well, I'd say the right way would be, are you able to get the sound you want? That's the right way. And if you're turning all the knobs and you've gained no understanding and you can't get it to sound the way you want, then maybe there's something fundamental you need to go back and learn about the equipment or what you're using, or something fundamental you need to learn about how the sound flows through the system.
Well, I'm with you there.
yeah.
And I would say that sometimes people fall into the
the
pitfalls of
mix
like
can't, the
going
mix
through
can't
presets.
fix a, the mix can't fix a bad composition. That's one thing to remember. You know,
Yeah.
if it doesn't sound right going into the mix, there's not, you know, you can't fix it by mixing it. You can't fix it by, you know, like, oh, if I put a better effect on it, if I make it more interesting, if it's the wrong sound, if it's the wrong riff, then you can't fix it later on. Fix it early on.
But isn't it
So it's
true if you turn
kind
up
of
the
what you're
reverb?
thinking. You can hear it earlier on everything. That
No.
makes you synthwave.
I think if you turn up the reverb, if you can't sing in tune, just turn up the reverb. We all know.
Well, that's old school thinking. That's before auto tune. Now
Well, and-
Yeah,
auto
that's
tune's
right.
in the
Now that
box.
there's auto-
Mhm.
you'll
And the
be
next step
able to
out-
sing.
The next step out from that is a mastering engineer can't necessarily fix a bad mix.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
like by the time it gets to
Mhm.
mastering, it should be a good mix. And if it isn't, then just mix it again. Like you can't expect like, you know, I remember I was recording like a garage band back in like the early 2000s, right? And like their solution was always, we'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in post. We'll fix it in post. And no,
Yeah.
you can't. It's too late by the time when you're in post. If you have a bad recording, it's a bad recording. Like you need to get the solid recording out the gate. And then you can turn the knobs and, you know, do all the effects that you want to it. But there's no solution for fixing a bad recording.
Well, I think learning that that like salt, you know, getting everything as it needs to be in the recording, starting like with the analog with the tapes and 4-tracks and all that, you had to be precise, just like taking pictures, you know. You like now you can just snap as many as you want and half of them are garbage. Well, more than that, but whatever. But yeah, and I mean it's the same thing, you know, you have to at some point you still have to hone your craft to get some kind of decent result. You can't just throw whatever you want at the wall and be like, throw some reverb, sample, reverse, whatever, and bam, song. I mean, you can, it's art, so you can do whatever the fuck you want, but, you know.
People do it all the time.
Exactly. But, you know, if you want something that's going to gain something, it's got to at least be pleasing and it's got to be in a marginally cohesive manner.
Well, and I was going to say, like, don't just jump through presets. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if you don't understand what the preset changed, because you're not gaining any understanding of what it did. Like, and that preset won't necessarily help when you change that drum sample, right? Because now you'll go back to that preset and you'll be like, well, damn, it doesn't sound like I wanted it to. Well, yeah, because you're not understanding what it was changing. You know, it was boosting 3K, and in this sample, you didn't have enough 3K, so it made it sound good. And in this one, you had too much 3K, now it's shredding your ears. Like, presets can be a potential pitfall because they can be a crutch, like, which is great, like when you're learning. But if you're not understanding what's being changed, you're like wading out into like dangerous waters.
I think another part of getting a good mix is also genres, I think, kind of help with this, because there's a reason why rock sounds good. You know, you have a bass, you have a guitar, you have drums, and you have a vocalist, and they sit in certain areas on the frequency spectrum.
Yep.
And when you add to it, you can add as much stuff as you want and create an orchestra, but there's a reason why there's violins and violas and cellos and instruments that occupy certain ranges. You're almost, by choosing voicing, you're kind of mixing already, because you're choosing what areas to put those sounds to make it even. And so that's also another thing I think people don't consider when mixing is, hey, you know, do I have too much cymbals plus too much distorted guitar at this one point in time, because now they are running each other over? Do I need to choose higher cymbals? Do I need to play a lower guitar riff? You know, whatever it is, or do I need to use less distortion on guitar because it's starting to bleed over into the cymbals? Whatever it is, there's usually starts with like the choice of instrument has a like a bandwidth, just like any type of communication. There's a bandwidth that, and you're filling up that space, and you got to kind of think of it that way when you're mixing, I think.
Absolutely. And I would say that, like, when you're listening to your full mix, use a frequency analyzer just to see which regions are bulky. Do you know what I mean? Because that was one of the things when I had done the first VHxRR album and we had paid Count to mix and master it. He told me, like, you're stacking too many things in this region. He's like, you got to shift something up an octave or do something different with it so that it spreads it out, because you're packing too much into around 2K, and we need that space for the voice too. And by simply taking something from, you know, like this C3 octave up to C4 or C5, all of a sudden you've created that space and balance.
It sounds amazing. Also, it just opens up, and you're like, it was a mess before. I couldn't hear anything. Yeah.
Yeah, all that mud that you were getting in there, just move things, balance them around. Yeah, and a frequency analyzer helps so much. Don't rely on it for everything, because you can't mix with your eyes. You still have to mix with your ears. But it helps immensely to get like a quick snapshot of where your track sits on a frequency graph, you know?
Yeah,
Now, you mentioned mixing with your eyes and mixing with your ears. I think there's another part that a lot of us mix with that you need to take into account. We mix with our egos too, you know, and we mix with our hearts, and that has its own huge set of pitfalls. If you're mixing a song that you wrote and that you love, and you think, okay, this is my child, this is something that I made, suddenly it's very easy to become deaf to those clashing frequencies, to the mud, because it's yours, you know, and you're forgiving it for things that you shouldn't be. And that's, I think, one of those places that, again, it comes in real handy having someone else there, that second set of ears, the professional studio.
Yeah,
Font,
and that's,
Count, tone box.
that was the exact thing that happened to me, like with the VHxRR stuff. I sent it to Count, and he told me what I was doing wrong and how to fix it and how to get better. And I needed to hear it from someone, and I wouldn't have got it if I didn't, you know, send it off to that other set of ears. And you know, his critique was like harsh, but like it was accurate. Like I couldn't argue with it. He was right. And even in my head when I wanted to be like, nah, he's right. You know, like, well, one of the things he told me, and like, it's why I've spent so much time trying to fix it, is he's like, I can hear your room in your mix. He's like, I can hear the problems in your room, your treble frequencies. He's like, because you're compensating for them. Like you're turning things up here, turning things down here. And until I properly treated my room, and then all of a sudden I could hear the song the way he was hearing the song in a properly treated space. And I was like, oh yeah, man, like I've been making some mistakes.
That might be something worth
add on.
Chatting about. Treating the room and having good monitors can make such a difference. We talked about this on the first video, where for me, when I got really good monitors, it made a huge difference, but also treating the room with bass traps and, you know, just making it so it's not an echoey mess that accentuates certain frequencies and has other frequencies bouncing around. it's really so important to be able to hear what you really have.
Yeah. Well, if you're in an untreated space and your room gain is boosting certain frequencies for you, you're turning those frequencies down so it sounds right.
Yeah.
So now when you take it to your car, there's a gap in those frequencies. And you're like, man, why does it sound like shit in the car? It's like, because your room is what's you're fighting. Like you're
And
going
that's
back,
even
and
if
you
you
take it back
have-
to your studio and you're like, it sounds great here. What is the problem with it? The problem is your room is giving you a fake impression of how it actually sounds.
Not to mention the speakers. Like I was
Yeah,
mixing
yeah.
on speakers that weren't flat either. So it was like, which is even worse? I'm not sure if my speakers were probably a worse culprit than my room was.
I will say, 2018, I got SonarWorks. Any of you guys ever use SonarWorks? Do you know what I'm talking about? SonarWorks is essentially like room correction. So it came with a reference mic, and it also works with headphones. So there's like 200 pairs of headphones where they already know what the frequency graph is for them. You click a button and it makes them like flat. And so what you can do that for your room. So essentially they give you a reference mic that comes calibrated. You put the calibration file in, and then it will ask you to stand there, put it in front of your left speaker, put it in front of your right speaker, put it in your listening position, and then it will have you hit about 30 areas in that area. And so it averages like a sweet spot space for you, and then tries to make your room response as flat as it can be. So I don't use it now because I've treated my room and I understand like what I'm doing. However, before I was able to, and what helped get me to where I am was getting SonarWorks and understanding like what was wrong with my room. Because the other thing that helps is you can, use that reference mic in any, room calibration software. So I used a thing called Room EQ Wizard, and you can put it in there and just measure the frequency response, send a sine wave through it, the whole way up, look back at your response and see what it is. And it's also helpful for placing your speakers in the room when you want to place them properly and make sure that you're not catching reflections off of things. Having a reference mic and making that equilateral triangle is like immensely helpful, because I've had issues where room aside, just having one of the monitors bumped where it was like slightly towed in or something messed with the frequency response,
So
because
Ron, explain about the equilateral triangle, because maybe not everybody even knows.
Oh, okay. The best thing you can do when you're listening to your speakers is to form an equilateral triangle with your speakers in your head. So measure the distance between your speakers, 60 inches, say, right? That's a long distance, but say it's 60 inches. Now, when you sit in your chair, you want 60 inches to this ear, 60 inches to this ear. Actually, it shouldn't be directly to the ear. It should form right behind you, because it should be forming at the point, and your ears should be slightly in front of the point, because, your ears have space between them, hopefully. So once you get that equilateral triangle set up, your imaging should be like pretty spot on. And it helps immensely, because if your tweeters are not facing the right directions, you're going to get all sorts of phase issues. And you can have it where like all of a sudden, you'll get a dip part, or you can get comb filtering if they're not like, comb filtering is where the reflections all hit back at a certain point, or they're out of phase at a certain point, and the frequency response resembles like the teeth on a comb. And a lot of the time that'll happen when one of the speakers isn't, like facing properly. Because if you face it out like this, now these waveforms are coming this way and these are kind of going out here, so they're not hitting at the same time,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Jason was saying with the, we mix with the ego type deal, especially when trading files between different musicians. If Dr. Sector sends me a mix of something we worked on online, and I have to do like a solo over top of it, I'm definitely turning whatever I'm playing up really hot so I can hear it, so I can do what I need to do. But then before I send it back, I am having to pull that back, get it into the mix, and to be able to send it back to him, because, you know, in the moment live, it sounds great to me because I have to hear what I'm doing, you know? And I think a lot of musicians think that way. That's fine. If you have to play that way, do it that way. But then realize when you're listening to it back, put it where it belongs, you know, bring it back where it belongs in the mix.
And I will say a helpful thing for like checking your mixes is put them on in the background when you're doing something else, like cooking or washing dishes, or you're like preoccupied, because those little issues and problems like, hey, that guitar came in way too loud, will jump out at you when you're not focusing on it, that they might not when you're like really trying to focus on it.
In the moment, like,
that's
yeah, this is a great
point.
concert.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do when I have a mix that I'm happy with is I'll just kick it around for a few days, listen to it in the car, listen to it here, listen to it there,
Take
for
notes.
exactly that reason. Because if on the third day you start going like, is that cowbell too loud? If you keep on saying, is that cowbell too loud to yourself, it probably is, you know?
Right, because you have that
Too
same
loud.
feeling every time you hear it. It's like
Yeah,
irking
Never
you.
too
one way.
loud.
exactly. That little like,
Either that or you're letting the ghost of Christopher Walken ruin your life here.
that's right. There's no such, that was a bad example. No such thing
Yeah.
as too much cowbell.
Now, one thing that I like to do, I have a special plugin. It's mastering the mix reference mix. And this is great because it lets you compare, like take another track, somebody else's track, and drop it in on your master bus. And then you can flip back and forth between your track and this track. And, you know, you can section off and you can see the graphic equalizer and kind of see, you know, you can set 3, 5, however many regions you want, and kind of see where the wave goes, comparing each to each on the track. And that is a really helpful thing. I mean, it's not, I don't feel bad about doing it. I don't feel bad about mixing to someone else's, you know, standard, because, you know, professional recordings sound good because they are professional recordings. So using them as a standard, using them as a guide is very helpful to me in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, I use their plugin called Levels. When I first started doing my own mastering, because that really helps you figure out what the Lufs are, what the dB is, what the true dB is, all that stuff. But actually, I've switched over to Fab Filter limiter, L2 limiter, that kind of does all the same stuff, but it also has a really nice, clean limiter on it that doesn't get like a bunch of crunchy, gross distortion that sometimes you can get if you're cranking down the limiter too tight.
One of my favorite limiters. Yeah.
Now, do we want to get into the sore subject of the Loudness Wars? Because for a long time, I mixed things the way I thought I was supposed to. Lots of dynamics, you know, and giving it headroom, and, you know, never crossing that line into digital space. You know, nothing peaks above 0, and it's everything's clean, nothing's ever distorted, but it was sounded so weak compared to everything else. And I had to learn the lesson that, like, some people break the rules in a certain way to get it to sound better. And I wonder, kind of like, what is the opinion on that? What rules are allowed to be broken? How far do you push things? And some people push things for a stylistic reason. I would say like Carpenter Brute does a lot of that kind of stuff. So what do you think about that?
I say master to the material. Like the song will tell you what it needs. Like you said, certain songs get their flavor from being pushed that hard. Others don't. I am a mastering engineer who prefers more the dynamics. I work in analog. I like that. Like, I don't want to crush the life out of a song. Like, there's other people who can do that. You know what I mean? And more power to them. But I don't like crushing the life out of a song. Because
But do you still feel like you have to compete at all? Like there's like a standard floor that you stick to, or is
No.
it just all by the mix or by the
I
genre?
say buy the material, because it's all getting turned down to -14 on Spotify or Tidal.
Yeah.
It's all getting turned down to the same level. So if you're getting normalized,
Normalized.
What are you getting normalized from, right? So some songs, like even for VHxRR, you know, like when I was doing single mixes, some are, you know, one luff hotter or a half luff hotter than another one because I felt that's what the song needed. I didn't want to push anymore. If I pushed any harder, it felt too hard. If I pushed any softer, I felt like I lost something. So I just wanted to get it to where I was really happy with it. Now, if I'm doing a whole EP, I'm going to make sure that, you know, they're all coming out at the same level. But, you know, I think you have to master to the material. I think it's too hard to try and use one rule, or don't like master for the services either, because they're gonna turn you down and it doesn't matter, right? So like if you're -13 and they turn you to -14, that's only this much of a gap, right? But if you're -9 and they turn you to -14, that's still going to sound like it has more balls and power to it because it's thicker. It's just glued together more and it's louder in general, even though it gets turned down to the same level, right?
Have you ever sent anything in to a
compressed.
streaming to like Spotify or whatever that was like super like blasting the Lufs like -7 or something? I heard some AC/DC song was like -7 Lufs or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, because all they do is turn it down, like, and they turn it down per album. So like, if that AC/DC album, you know, would come in at whatever Lufs, you know, that the program average might come in at -7, and then they go, all right, normalized to -14, and now it's going to be the same volume as everything else. But here's where I think, like, that's why give up the dynamics if you're going to lose it? You know what I mean? I'm not saying like have a mix that's so dynamic that you lose all the power to it. I'm saying, you know, keep some of the dynamics in there because you're all going to get turned down anyhow. And I think that at a certain point, like when everything is just fucking loud, like there's no differentiation between sounds, right? Like it's just noise at a certain point because it's just all equally loud.
like I like the sound of transients and the percussion and stuff like that oftentimes, which I think to a certain extent is what you're talking about. You have a wider dynamic range, which, you know, gives you that punch in the percussion. But if everything else feels wimpy because you're letting your transients spike so high through that everything's got to be turned down to have your transients at -1 dB or whatever the requirement is. So I kind of try to split the difference. The other thing too, sometimes things that are really compressed can sound good. I think it just depends on the style of music and
it's taste.
doing, you know.
Yeah.
Well, it also depends on distribution method. You can't use the same master for, you know, a CD as you would for vinyl if you're going to do both.
Right.
You have to have separate masters for both, and then you probably wouldn't want to use the same master for the CD and for Spotify. Although a lot of people now I think are making that, you know, it's like I'm just going to do one digital and then I'm going to use that for tape too if I do tape. But
By the way, if people are listening to this and they're like, what the hell are you guys talking about with Lufs? I think you have a couple of different options. You can either go online and study this stuff up and try to understand what are we talking about with Lufs, with mastering, with the Loudness Wars. Google Loudness Wars, Lufs, all that stuff will show up. Or the other option is send it out to a mastering engineer, somebody that knows what they're doing and can do it for you. What's the going price for a single to have a pro master it?
Varies. I mean, you know, for me, a single master is 150. However, you know, when I was looking for other people to do it, like when we went to count, it was 400 a master. A mix was $1,000. So it varies, you know. I am not that expensive. But
would you mix one for me for $149.99?
Just
yeah.
do an infomercial.
I think but yeah, I mean, like it varies, you know. So I also always try and discount for bulk too, because I understand that like people are doing this on their own, and you know, you don't always have like a ton of money or a label behind you, and so I try and work with people, you know, within reason. but like I made the leap. I have been mixing and mastering as a professional for over a decade, but I've only been doing it full time for the past year and a half. And in doing so, like I can't always be as like generous as I used to with people, because like there is that line of like, well, this is how I feed my family now. You know what I mean? And so I can't always give people things for free, where in the before it could have been like, oh, you're my boy. It's like, well, of course I am. You know, but now at the same point, like, you know, I try and help people where I can, but I still have to make a living at the end of the day, you know?
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah, I think, you know, videos like this will help people in general to at least have a starting point, right? Like we just were talking about a second ago. Hey, learn some of the basics, right? Get out there and you know, watch YouTube, look up what you got to look up. You know, try the stuff out yourself first, you know, and figure out at least a portion of it, right? So that when you're having these conversations back and forth with someone like yourself who's, you know, very skilled in this area, you at least know what the hell's going on.
Well, and Lufs stands for Loudness Unit Full Scale. And essentially it came about as a more accurate way to assess program data than like a decibel. And it
Perceived loudness versus.
right, it's perceived loudness. Yeah, so it's like more like your RMS data than like decibels can vary widely on peaks. And the first time I became aware of it was I was doing audio for a movie, and when the production house had like how all the files had to be delivered, they were asking for things in Lufs, and I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up. And I was like, okay, loudness unit full scale. This was like 2014. But you know, I learned. I looked it up. I learned, and I learned how to use them to my advantage for mixing and mastering.
Yeah. I would describe it like the temperature, right? Like you have the actual temperature of what it is outside, and then you have the what does it feel. They have the what does it feel like temperature.
Wind chill. Yeah.
LUFs are kind of more like the what, how hot does it really sound, right?
That's a good
Yeah.
way of describing it. Yeah.
Look, if it's 40 degrees with a wind chill of -2, it's freaking -2. Right?
Right.
Next, we have what is the difference between producing music and mixing and mastering?
Well, producing, I think in most cases, it's and this is just an arbitrary definition, but I mean it's the composition and the tech, like the tonal composition as well, not just the order of the notes on the page or on the in the DAW, and the addition in some cases of words and lyrics to them, and the mixing part is once you've got those tracked, once you've decided on all the compositional elements, what they are, how they're arranged. So that's my take on it. Who wants to add or
I'll throw in
contradict that?
Something. So I think if you look at old school days, let's talk about the Beatles. So you got George Martin, the producer, right? Then you have whoever's behind the desk and figuring out where to put the mics. That's the engineer. And then like you have the musicians, you have the Beatles. They're creating the stuff. I feel like it's kind of weird now. Because I do electronic music and it's all kind of mixed together, what we were talking about before, where all the roles are kind of mixed together. There are sometimes people will use the term music producer. It's almost like now music producer is anybody that just like makes tracks and makes songs, especially like in like hip hop or some kind of electronic music genre. But then like, in the past, it was somebody more like Rick Rubin that is going to be in the studio with you and is going to help get the most out of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Well, what if you go back? What if you start with the chorus instead of start with the verse? What if we bring everything down here? Flea, what if you play a little bit less in this section? Like somebody that's kind of a creative collaborator that's assisting in the creative process, more so than the guy that's like, well, should we use this mic to mic the amp? I think it's more like the engineer. But I think those terms are changing nowadays.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that term is thrown around. Like, I'm a producer, I make beats. I hear that a lot. Or,
Right.
I'm a producer, I record stuff in a studio.
Riddance.
So like, yeah, the definition of that word depends on who you ask, but I think in more of the pro scene, it was like you were saying, like, you have a guy with the band that's helping them coordinate how they record and how they market their stuff and how they get it through the process of becoming produced. And that seems to be like, at least for what I can understand, is the most common definition, but it does get used colloquially, like for so many other things. Like people will be just recording stuff and mixing it and say, I'm a producer. And it's like, okay, you're part of the process of music producing. Yes. But I think that actually refers to a particular person's job, which is typically to assist in getting the band to get their stuff recorded and get it out there in the proper fashion. So,
Well, I think like that's the difference between a producer and like the label system
yeah.
and like a producer like now, because it's just not the same anymore. Like, and I think it's, for the same reasons we've been talking about everything else, right? Like, it's easier to do it at home now. And so people are wearing more hats. And so keep in mind, a producer used to get points on the album. Like, they used to get paid off how well that album sold. They got a percentage of it. That's, is that still happening? No, because like, there's not points to be given. Like, everything's happening either like on, people are putting stuff out on their own, or you're still stuck in the giant label system. And yeah, maybe you're a producer getting a couple points, but I think Max Martin is a producer, right? Like people in that degree still, I think, and Rick Rubin, and there are those people that still exist in that level, but
Daniel Miller.
Yeah, but it's for the people that have, 6 to 7 figure budgets. I don't think producers in the old term exist now outside of that.
I was going to say, guys, when was the last time any of you actually looked at a major label's liner notes and saw someone listed who wasn't, a part of the band as a producer? Because I mean, you remember that from, the good old days. You would always see that. You would always see, producer is Daniel Miller, producer is Flood, or something like that. Rick Rubin has come up a couple of times. Or another example, if you want to get Rudy Van Gelder, if you want to go back to the jazz age.
Butch Vig, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, but I mean, he blurred the lines too, because in Garbage, he was
the
band. So yeah. And I think, I mean, that was grunge maybe is where that started to happen, that era. But
grunge felt more DIY, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he was known as a producer before Garbage. He was everybody's producer, for what was the label. But before that, I mean, you'd see that even a little bit more. Like the best Depeche Mode albums were produced by Daniel Miller, of course, and then usually Alan Wilder would get a producer credit too, even though he's part of the band, but he's the musical part. So, but I mean, what I'm wondering is, when was the last time anybody here, checked out a major label release? Like, for example, Adele is the one that's, causing all the problems in the vinyl supply chain right now. Who's the producer on her album? Is she the only producer? I don't know. I mean, I'm not.
21 Pilots released some stuff the last few years, and guys from other bands that I know that dissolved, they are listed as being producers on different songs. It's more of like a per song thing now, it seems like, especially if things seem to be more released like singles, even though there might be part of an album, and there'll be a music video for everything, and all those things have producers. And you're right, it is like a more industry leading job title, and the term is changing. I'm not trying to downplay people using the term themselves because they do everything. I'm just saying, what is a typical definition? If you go into industry, what are they going to expect what is the expected job of the producer, right? That's what I was trying to basically underline. And I've seen all kinds of names and different producers on different tracks all the time. So well, that's to answer the question, was the last time I've seen it, I guess.
Well, I mean, back to Jason's point, half the music that I listen to, is there even a band there? You know what I mean? There's a certain amount of stuff that's like, and 21 Pilots is an interesting example, because they kind of are a band, but they also produce a bunch of stuff in their home studio that when they play live, they're playing along. You know, it's two guys. One guy's
Yeah.
singing and playing bass, the other guy's playing drums. And
It's
they have
way
tons
more
and
than two
tons of-
guys though when it gets in the studio. There's a ton of people behind those tracks. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I mean, they're actually closer to a modern day rock band than a lot of stuff out there, where it's like, is there even a band there? Does anybody even play the drums? You know what I mean? I think the whole way music is created, depending on the genre, has totally departed from what it was in 1975 or whatever, you know?
Definitely.
So what's next,
I don't know,
Mike?
I was going to take it.
That's a good
Yeah.
stopping point on that one.
You would put the end cap on that
That's
one.
Might be a good place to cut off and back up a little. Yeah.
So the third question, last question, I think we touched on it in the first bit. Is it better to have someone else mix and master, or should I do it myself?
That's subjective. I
And
mean,
yes.
depending on your skill set, you can. I know for a fact I've tried to master my own stuff for years and am not good at it. It's just not my bag. And I mean, I always think getting another pair of ears on anything, regardless, whether it's mix, master, whatever, is not
I've had bad experiences with people mastering stuff for me that were supposed to know what they were doing. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that other people couldn't do it, but I could get what I wanted out of it better than they could. And so that kind of led me to try to learn more about it, because I knew how I wanted it to sound. And it just sounded better across all different types of speakers, and they did weird stuff to it. And they were supposed to be like a professional studio. They had way better equipment than me, and racks, and you know, Macs with huge setups with all the right stuff, and monitors and everything. And I think the guy just had money and just didn't 100% either care about what he was mixing, or just didn't know what he was doing. I don't know. Like, I think sometimes you just got to take it on yourself if there's no one in your area to do it for you, or you just don't have the money, you know. And that's it. Kind of like necessity forces you to learn, I guess.
I think it also might depend on if you, like Vaughn was talking about earlier, some people have a little bit more of a technical bent or interest. And if that comes to you naturally, if you like that, then maybe you can figure out it and do well. But again, you know, a lot of it's about money too, you know.
Well,
Yeah,
and
like,
you're going to know your own music the best, right? And so, like, if someone is just missing the target that you want, but you're capable of getting it there on your own, or at least closer than they are, then go for it on your own. Because at the end, you know, you want the end product to be something you're happy with and you want to listen to, right? And so I don't think it matters if someone else does it or you do it, as long as you're happy with it in the end. And if you're capable of getting it across the line, do it. Go for it, you know?
That probably brings up a good point just in general. Like, how many times do you guys hear the advice that the most important thing is your ears? If it sounds good to you, like, you got to use your ears. And it goes back to the thing that we were talking about with the Lufs. How much compression are you going to put in? How much you're going to smash it? All that stuff. A big part of it is like, what sounds good to you, you know?
One problem is that your ears are human ears. You know, you're not computerized ears, and you're going to hear it again. Going back to what we were saying about, you know, mixing with art, mixing with the ego. The things that you hear in it, the reason that you choose those sounds, they might not be the best thing for everyone to hear. So what I would say is one of the best advantages to having someone else at least do your mastering, if not your mixing and your mastering, is that you get to take that step away. You get to get that second pair of ears where, you know, your ego is taken out of, you know, the loop. And somebody can say, look, this is, you know, maybe between the two of your sounds, you know, between the two pairs of ears, yours and your mastering engineers, your mixing engineers, you're going to arrive at something a little closer to what more listeners will want to hear. So I think it's worth it just to get that second set of ears. Somebody who will say, look, I know you love this bell, but it is really blowing out this frequency ratio. You're blowing everything out in the 5Ks or something like that.
Dr. Sector, that's you.
Yeah, you're making me realize. Yeah, you're making me realize that we've got a kind of a unique situation, right? And the way that we produce back and forth is, so Mr. D and I kind of like we toss the producer role back and forth between one another as we're making music, right? And getting that second set of ears is continuously happening between the two of us. So it's interesting the dynamic that happens as we're building out songs, where we're able to kind of critique and take on those different roles in real time as the song's being built from the ground up. So I don't know if a lot of people
loves the like high mid-range bells that just killed me, and I gotta tell him to tone it down.
All the bells.
Love me some bells.
The bells.
But yeah,
Quasi-sector.
Quasi-sector, yeah, that concept of having that second set of ears I think is extremely important, right? Because you, like we've said, you can become you can't see the forest for the trees, blind to your own your own BS. So
well, I have to say, like, I keep bringing it up, but we hired Count for that first thing, and 2 months ago I went back and I listened to the mixes we had sent him originally to have him mastered before we had him mix and master. Holy shit, were they bad. Like, with time and space, my God, like, I don't know how my shit was set up that I was hearing it and going, yes, that's what I wanted. But yeah, like, with enough time and space, I was wrong and he was right. And like, I definitely appreciate having someone tell me what I was doing wrong, because I didn't just not take it for granted. I took it to heart, and I tried to get better.
Going back, you're hearing like what you did in reference to what you've now accepted as being right. So, perhaps it's like, okay, maybe, maybe it's not right and wrong. Maybe it's just that, like, okay, well, I've accepted a more professional way of hearing things according to the people that I've decided to follow. Count, for instance.
Well, and I got my monitoring right, so I can hear now. So, like, because I was blowing out the wrong frequencies, like and a lot of it was because I was trying to mix on NS10s, but they weren't NS10s. Do you know what I mean? I was still using, like, I used to have NS10s, and then I had sold them, and I was mixing on other ones, but I was still trying to use them like they were NS10s, and all my mixes sounded like dog shit. And so, I had like this 2-year period where I went through probably 9 different pairs of monitors before I finally landed on Amphions. And then I bought my NS10s back because I wanted that crutch. Like, I knew them so well.
So maybe, like, trust your ears, like EGM's trying to say, is trust your ears in different situations. You would never trust yourself to know something from seeing it from one angle. So like Vaughn was saying earlier, listen to it when you're not paying attention, listen to it while you are paying attention, listen to it in the car, listen to it with headphones, listen to it through the monitors, listen to it all different ways and trust your ears. And if your ears say it sounds bad in this situation, why does it sound bad in that situation? Now you're troubleshooting. Now you're finding out what frequencies might be wrong in your mix, or what's wrong with your monitors, or what you need to adjust so that next time you mix, you overcome those things. So it is still trust your ears. It's just trust them in a bunch of different settings. Remove whatever that, like, emotional, like, you're in the moment. Yeah, this sounds great. It's pounding really hard. And then later you're like, nah, that's obnoxious as hell, right? So yeah, it's still trust your ears, but give your ears something to work with, I think is the main thing there.
And a tip, understand that your ears will fatigue. The longer you work on something,
give yourself a lot of breaks.
Yeah, because your moves will start to smear and you won't be able to hear things as clearly because your ears will be tired. Like, listening is an active thing. Like, it requires concentration. And so you can only do it for so long before your ears get tired and you got to take a break. And, like, the best thing to do is get out of the physical space you're in. Go to something with like different acoustics, because just going to a room with like different natural reverb will help reset your ears to a different space. So when you come back to your mixing space, you're kind of like
Also, sometimes it's just
recalibrated.
like the amount. So like if you with your eyes, if you stare at something red and then you stare at something white, you'll see blue because your eyes adjusted, said, hey, that's a little bit too red for me, and pushed back into blue a little bit, right? You became less sensitive to red. Same thing with sounds. You're going to become, if you're listening to like a hot mix over and over again at these particular frequencies or a flood of things, your brain's flattening that stuff out so that when you take it away, you hear that little sparkles going on. That's your brain trying to say, hey, I'm doing my own equalization. If that's happening too much, then you're starting to mix that into your mix. Like, I can't get this loud enough, I can't get this to sound the way I want. Your brain has already pushed those frequencies out. So sometimes, yeah, you're right, like just taking a break allows that to calm back down again.
They
The other
say
big
not
thing
to
is
make
that
too loud for that same reason, because your ear naturally attenuates, apparently, especially like the kind of abrasive upper mid-range frequencies. So your ear starts to turn that down because you're mixing loud. So then you compensate for it in the mix. And then the next day you listen to it and it's like, what the hell? This is all super abrasive, loud upper mid-range. So
above 115 decibels, we don't perceive sound as getting louder. Okay. So if you have certain frequencies that are hitting 115, 116, 118, right? And you have other ones that aren't, you don't even realize that those are that much louder because you can't hear it. You've cranked it way too loud. Now, granted, a lot of speakers don't get that loud. That's typically like in a car with the system cranked. But the point is that our ears have a built-in limit. They have like a threshold at which point, once you start hitting that ceiling, it's like a real limiter where everything just starts pushing up against it more. And the things that are poking out past it, you can't hear.
Well, isn't the sweet spot supposed to be like in the 72 to 80 decibel range? You want to keep everything right in
75 to 85 is like your 85 should be your max mix decibel. Like you don't want to mix much louder than that. And that's like as loud as standing next to a lawnmower. That's the equivalent of that.
Yeah,
so,
over half an hour
still
at
loud.
over 85 decibels is like permanent hearing loss of a certain amount. Yeah,
it's loud. Like 85 decibels is a good amount. Like Chris Lord Alge, who I like his mixes, he's done a lot of Green Day stuff. He mixes on NS10s and he mixes as soft as possible. Like literally he said to the point that like when his assistant's typing on like a keyboard, he's like, hey, you're being too loud. Like, because again, like if your equipment is loud enough and accurate enough that when you listen to it at a low volume, everything's still represented. Do you know what I mean? You can mix at a very low level and then you can mix for longer periods of time too, because you're not crushing your ears, because NS10s are notoriously rough on the ears. Like your ears fatigue quickly with them.
Another aspect of fatigue is that it's real easy to get focused in on one aspect of the sound so that you're not hearing the sound for the mix, you're just hearing the sound for what it's doing. Is it clearing out enough? You're not listening, not even necessarily like for the sounds that are around it, that that are in the same frequency level and whether it's carved out, but you're not hearing it for the mix itself.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Sherman.
Yeah, sorry. You hear this guy crying? He wants to go on the couch. Go ahead, buddy. It's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, buddy.
Yeah, another tip I'll make, don't EQ things in solo. Like don't solo things in a mix and EQ them, because you could spend, I don't know, however long you want getting that sounding right. But as soon as you fold it back into the mix, now it's not going to sound the same because now other things are masking it and whatnot. So
I hate that when you have like an awesome guitar tone all alone. You're like, this guitar tone is the best. And then you put it in the mix and it's like, I can't even hear it. Just turn it up, turn it up, turn it up. Now I can hear it. It sounds beautiful. Where's the drums? You can't hear anything. Yeah, it's a disaster. Yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah, and being a musician, having that musician's ear, I think sometimes you tend to pick apart and just only listen to the drums or just only listen to the guitar, because as a musician that you just listen to music that way now, because when you're playing with band members, maybe you're following the drummer or you're following the bassist for a part, or you care about your solo. And so when you listen to the track back, you care about a particular part, so you listen to that part. And sometimes it's hard to, as a performer or a musician, to take yourself out of it if you're trying to mix your own stuff and say, hey, listen to this as a song as if you're not in it, you're not playing in it, you know? Sometimes that
That's
helps
like
too.
getting back to what Jason
is
was
tricky
saying
to
about
do.
not mixing with your ego, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to disassociate and listen just as a listener, right? Because if you're thinking about it, you know, we talked about this before, you know, we're writing music for ourselves, you know, at the end of the day, you know, it's an art form, but we want other people to listen to it, right? And most people who listen to music are not, you know, tenured musicians. You know, they're going to listen to it for an emotion, a feel, you know, nostalgia, especially with these genres, right? So there's an extra level there that you kind of have to take yourself out of that musician's mindset for a moment and just sit back and say, all right, does this evoke the emotion that I want it to evoke? You
Yeah,
know?
not so much ego, but like before I knew how to play music, or like when I was a kid listening to music, I remembered being able to hear songs for the entire song, and I wouldn't pick things out of them. And it's become such a habit as a musician to pick pieces out and listen to them individually that it's almost like hard to go back again. And I think sometimes, yeah, you just, like Vaughn said, again, it's so important to be distracted and doing something else, and your brain almost goes back to that other mode of listening, of like
Yeah.
everything is mixed together now because you're not honed in on the music.
Passive
It's definitely-
listening and active listening, right? Like that passive is that listening to things as the whole totalitarianism, if you will.
So I got a question for you guys. If you've ever had this experience, sometimes I'll have a mix with a bunch of different percussion in there. Like maybe I'll have some hand claps or something, as well as a snare sound, or maybe even multiple snare sounds. And I'll be listening, I'll be mixing them. It's like, I can't hear that hand clap at all. But then then I solo the hand clap. Oh yeah, it's there. And then once I hear it without changing anything, now all of a sudden I can hear it in the mix easily, because there's like weird brain stuff going on, you know?
I always picture like a song is like lanes, right? On a highway. And your brain can switch lanes of what melody it's listening to in a song. And so when I write songs, sometimes songs will sound busy because I'll have like 4 patterns going. But when I listen back to them, my brain will fall in different lanes depending which time I'm listening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And an interesting thing about that in terms of how different genres structure arrangements. Like if you look at Metallica, for example, you're going to get everything lined up. Both guitars are playing the same riff. The bass is playing the same riff. The toms are on the same beats, whatever. Everything's lined up to be this machine. You listen to something like drum and bass or reggae or something. If you listen to the Police, everybody's playing a different part. It's all syncopated. It's all overlapping. You can hear everything individually. And I think that's where it can be really important to carve out different frequency range for here. The guitar is here, the voice is here, the drums are here, the bass is here. Everything can easily be heard without interfering with everything else, that sort of thing.
The Police had the advantage of just being 3 guys making 4 different sounds, basically. So
yeah,
that goes back to the genre thing. I think a lot of what defined genres in the past is the choice of instruments and the choice of effects for those instruments. So like jazz in a lot of cases is going to have certain instruments that do things at certain times, and classical is going to have an orchestra, but the orchestra is separated into the different voices. And rock is going to have, you know, it was a staple of a genre because it just worked that way. The voices were where they needed to be. And so it was kind of like, it's going back to the recipe idea. Like it was a recipe that worked, but now we can do so much things with music that the genres have just gotten out of, like they're off the charts now, and you can put voices anywhere and change any octave. And yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, your percussion could be a sample of anything. Trash falling down the steps. Like all the rules are gone in terms of, you know.
We actually have a song where we we sampled boiling water, nails on a chalkboard, and Enya, and turned them into instruments.
That's cool.
So yeah, why not? You know, it can be anything.
It's that time again to wrap up another video. I want to thank you guys again, taking the time. We know we're all busy, taking the time to do this together. Another great video with a lot of information. Going forward, if anyone has any topics they want us to address in future videos, feel free to leave a comment below, or you can reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, and we'll definitely put that into thought for our next videos. Again, guys, thank you. Hope everyone had a good time watching this. That's it. That's a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Sherman.
She's sleeping already, or
Yeah, he's-
there he is.
Up on the couch.
there's the loaf of bread.